Let's now take a look at the selection process in more detail and consider the types of tools that are often used. The first step is a job analysis. Before anything, companies need a clear understanding of the job role and the attributes of an ideal candidate. This is where requirements are defined and vacancies identified. Next comes when the organization advertises the position. With a clear blueprint for the job, the organization now spreads the word. This involves crafting an enticing yet accurate job advertisement, showcasing both the role and the ideal candidate attributes. Next would come a primary screening. In selection processes with a high number of applicants, initial screening is important. This involves reviewing online application forms, CVs, and responses to situational exercises, where people are given situations and asked how they'd respond. These tools are used to streamline evaluation. Automated systems make this efficient and cost-effective. The goal here is to refine the applicant pool to those who have the necessary qualifications. Next comes a secondary screening. The selected few then enter a more rigorous round. Here, cognitive and personality assessments, real-world simulations, and interviews come into play. This provides a closer look at each candidate, evaluating them beyond just their paperwork. Based on the results then, the top candidates receive their job offers. Finally, evaluation. A good organization never stops evaluating. After the hirings happen, companies assess how well the selection tools predicted on-the-job success, refining their approach for future recruitment and selection. Let's consider some tools that are used in that primary screening process. One common tool, of course, is the resume. You'd think something as ubiquitous as resume would be straightforward, right? But employers often find themselves swamped with the sheer volume they get. And since applicants decide what goes on their resume, comparing them can be tricky. Surprisingly, not much research delves into how effective resumes actually are in selection. But an interesting outcome of the shift towards online resume platforms is that they guide applicants, ensuring employers get consistent, relevant details that can be more easily compared. Reference checks can also be useful. First off, they help sift out any potential red flags, ensuring that the person being hired won't be a risk. No one wants to accidentally hire someone who could be harmful to other employees, either psychologically or even physically. But their credibility as a predictor of job performance is less clear. After all, applicants usually pick referees who sing their praises, bypassing anyone who might cast them in a negative light. An increasingly popular tool is the online application form. These are simple, cost-effective, and gaining a lot of traction. But some companies are taking it up a notch with the weighted application bank. Instead of generic questions, this goes deeper, focusing on specific qualifications and experience. And it's not just about gathering info, it's about weighting and ranking it. More qualifications? This leads to a higher score. More experience? That's another boost in your rating. It's a more strategic, statistical, quantitative approach to screening. Perhaps the most well-validated tests used in selection are cognitive ability tests. These tests are remarkable predictors of job performance. Often when we discuss cognitive ability, we're talking about general mental ability, or G, and it encompasses various skills. If an employer decides to assess your cognitive ability, you're likely to face three types of tests: abstract reasoning, numerical ability, and verbal comprehension. The average score across these three tests typically gives a decent estimate of someone's G. Beyond these, there are niche ability tests too, from evaluating critical analysis skills to checking if you have the physical, mechanical, or spatial ability needed for specific jobs. So cognitive ability tests offer some huge advantages. One is their high predictive validity. The magic of cognitive ability tests comes from the fact that they're highly correlated with job performance. Another advantage is their defendability. Since they predict job performance for most jobs, they're often very appropriate and it's hard to challenge their use. They're also impression-proof. Unlike interviews or personality tests, they're less susceptible to impression management. You can't charm your way through a cognitive ability test. And they're cost-effective. They can be administered to large groups, saving both time and money. On the flip side, cognitive ability tests do have some disadvantages. There's a critique that they might favor certain ethnic or cultural groups, especially those with early education advantages. However, some tests like Raven's progressive matrices, which focus on abstract reasoning, might have less cultural bias. If you've taken a job interview or assessment and been faced with a slew of questions trying to gauge who you are, you've probably taken a personality test. There are a whole range of tests that gauge personality traits, from the 16 personality factor questionnaire to the Eysenck personality inventory, the NEO personality inventory, the Hogan personality inventory, to the Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory, just to name a few. These general personality tests are broad, but some tests, like the Occupational Personality Questionnaire, tailor questions to the workplace. They'll ask questions in a way that might seem like they have more face validity for the candidate experience. Think of trying to assess conscientiousness in the context of work by asking people whether they're clean and tidy at home. Some people might struggle with this because they might feel, even if I'm a little untidy at home, I'll obviously be tidy at work. So the work-related ones might be more face valid and also potentially more predictive of actual workplace behaviors. So personality tests are popular and can be useful, but there are some challenges. One is profile matching. Some employers might think that they need candidates who fit a precise personality profile. Someone who's high in conscientiousness and openness to experience, who maybe has a little bit of agreeableness, who's low on neuroticism, and medium on extroversion. This is called profile matching, but this isn't what most personality tests are designed for. The particular blend of ratings across different dimensions isn't actually predictive of job performance. Instead, the different traits need to be considered independently. Another challenge is impression management. Applicants are smart. They sometimes sense what traits the job values and consciously or unconsciously skew their answers that way. For example, if emotional stability seems key, they might fudge their answers to appear more stable. The good news is that proper instructions at the beginning can reduce this. Informing candidates that honesty is detectable and that the organization values honest responding will often make them more likely to respond honestly. A third challenge is candidate reactions. Not everyone likes being put in a box by a questionnaire, especially when those non-work-related questions pop up. It feels intrusive and irrelevant. Some organizations, like Queensland Rail, for example, intentionally sidestep this by cherry-picking the skills relevant to the job. If the job involves driving, they'd focus on risk-taking and impulsivity, since these correlate with driving behavior. Let's talk a little bit about the theory that underlies personality tests. The dominant model of personality is called the 5-factor model. It's a model that represents the culmination of almost a century of research. And this was derived from many, many years of factor analytic research. So many studies with many large data sets of items assessing different traits and tens of thousands of people. And it's data-driven techniques that have led us to this understanding of the 5 factors. It's also been reproduced in many different countries and languages. These 5 factors, which we've already touched on throughout the course, provide a comprehensive framework to understand the spectrum of human behaviors and tendencies. The first factor is openness to experience. Picture someone who is ever curious, eager to delve into new cultures, ideas, and art forms. They're the individuals who thrive in scenarios that require thinking and learning. These are people who are creative, cultured, intellectual, and perceptive. A second factor is conscientiousness. These individuals epitomize reliability. Whether it's a project at work or a commitment in their personal life, they exhibit discipline and diligence. Conscientious people are orderly, dependable, industrious, and disciplined. There's also extroversion. Extroverts are often charismatic, gravitating towards social activities and teamwork. They are assertive, competitive, they radiate positive emotions, and are innately sociable. The fourth factor is agreeableness. Individuals high in agreeableness are compassionate collaborators. They're the glue that holds teams together. They're warm-hearted, well-liked, gentle, and cooperative. And the fifth factor is neuroticism. Individuals with high neuroticism might grapple with anxiety, depression, and self-doubt. On the flip side, those high in emotional stability, neuroticism's positive counterpart, exhibit traits like being relaxed and not easily overcome by negative emotions. Research consistently demonstrates the predictive ability of personality questionnaires that are based on this 5-factor model in domains such as job performance, sales metrics, job satisfaction, training, leadership, and other pertinent job-related behaviors. But it's also important to note that not all these traits have large effects. Remember our lecture on leadership, when we discussed how personality might predict leadership emergence, but is less able to predict how effective a leader is actually going to be once they've emerged. One influential classic meta-analysis that stands out is by Barrick and Mount in 1991. And you might note that a lot of the key research in the field of personality is quite old. And that's because the field is a century old. We've already uncovered a lot of what there is to know about personality, so the core knowledge has been in place for a long time, with only minor updates and adjustments happening more recently. Barrick and Mount's research highlighted conscientiousness as a leading predictor of job and training proficiency across almost all jobs. Extroversion, too, was shown to be important, especially for roles requiring interpersonal interactions like sales and management, as well as in training proficiency, how quickly someone can learn or upskill. Openness to experience is also linked with training proficiency. However, traits like neuroticism and agreeableness don't have as much predictive power. This raises an intriguing point. Why measure all dimensions of the Big Five if only 3 of them actually predict job performance? We know it's not appropriate to select based on criteria that aren't related to performance on the job. But is it ethical or responsible to even measure these things? A fascinating study by Thorson and colleagues explored how personality influenced not just classic metrics like immediate sales performance, but also the trajectory of an individual's performance over time. The usual suspects, conscientiousness and extroversion, correlated positively with sales figures, but only conscientiousness predicted growth in performance over time. What's more, agreeableness and openness to experience, traits not usually linked to performance, also predicted changes in performance over time. So the personality factors that might predict performance at a given point in time might be different to those that predict how performance evolves and grows. Another breakthrough came from Professor Andrew Neal and his team right here at UQ, who introduced a new model of performance. This model examined the predictors of proficiency in a job, adaptability to evolving situations, and proactive behavior. While conscientiousness remained a top predictor of proficiency, the real game changer was the discovery that openness to experience was critical for proactive behaviors, like initiating change. In 2019, a huge meta-analysis was published on extroversion. And this wasn't just any meta-analysis. It was a meta-analysis of 97 other meta-analyses, which examined extroversion's impact on diverse outcomes like education, job performance, and career lifespan. They concluded that extroverts seemed to have, firstly, a motivational advantage, likely due to heightened sensitivity to rewards. But they also had an emotional advantage, positive emotions contributing to resilience and better stress handling. Third, they had an interpersonal advantage, a known strength of extroverts, boosting leadership emergence and persuasiveness, particularly useful in sales. And finally, they had a performance advantage. This was thought to be an outcome of the combined motivational, emotional, and interpersonal advantages. Unsurprisingly, extroverts often outperformed their introverted counterparts. This echoes the findings of the seminal 1990s Barrick and Mount research. A notable shift in personality research more recently is the exploration of personality's fluidity. Studies indicate that big career changes, like managerial promotions, can bolster traits like conscientiousness over time. And there's growing interest in interventions where individuals engage in activities contrary to their natural disposition. For example, introverts who typically avoid group engagements due to anxiety were encouraged to act extroverted. The outcomes were encouraging. Participants not only experienced heightened well-being, but many realized these group interactions were not as daunting as they initially perceived.